It wasn't a bullet, a rattlesnake, or a frontier fever that threatened to steal the life of the wealthiest boy in Redemption Gulch. It was something invisible, a silent poison hiding in plain sight, a phantom that wore the mask of progress. The town doctor, a man of puffed-up certainty, called it consumption. The jealous whispers in the saloon called it a curse. His powerful father saw only a baffling weakness in his proud Lakota bloodline. But one person, the quietest girl in the county, a shy wallflower who polished the doctor's instruments and folded his linens, saw the truth. Cora May Thompson noticed the tremor in the boy's hand, the faint grey line on his gums, the subtle tells that everyone else, in their pride and prejudice, chose to ignore. This is the story of how her quiet observation became a defiant roar, shattering a town's ignorance and saving a life that was already being mourned. The town of Redemption Gulch, Montana Territory, was carved from stubborn rock and even more stubborn ambition. It sat nestled in a valley that bled gold in the summer and froze solid in the winter, a place where fortunes were made overnight and lost by sunrise. Its spine was a single, muddy thoroughfare, flanked by raw timber storefronts, a general store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, and the small office of Dr. Alistair Finch. It was in this office, smelling perpetually of carbolic acid and dust, that Cora May Thompson spent her days. At 19, Cora was a creature of the shadows she so often occupied. She was plain in a way that made people's eyes slide right past her, with mousy brown hair perpetually escaping its bun and hands that were always busy, wiping, folding, sorting, anything to avoid the daunting task of meeting a stranger's gaze. Her shyness was a physical thing, a heavy cloak she couldn't shrug off. She spoke in whispers, moved like a mouse along the skirting boards of life, and found her only real solace in the quiet order of the doctor's clinic. She knew the precise location of every bottle, the exact number of sutures on a card, and the unique scent of each medicinal tincture. Dr. Finch, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his waistcoat as much as his ego strained the patience of his peers, considered her little more than a fixture. Cora, fetch the laudanum. Cora, the basin is soiled. Cora, be a dear and vanish. She was useful, silent, and cheap, the 3 qualities he most admired in an assistant. It was from this overlooked vantage point that Cora first began to notice the subtle unraveling of Coda Blackwood. The Blackwoods were not like the other ranchers. Chief Joseph Blackwood, Coda's father, was a Lakota man of immense presence and even greater wealth. He had negotiated shrewdly with the government, secured vast tracts of the most fertile grazing land, and built the Arrowhead Creek Ranch into an empire that dwarfed the holdings of men like Caleb Thorne, whose family had founded the town. The Blackwoods were a paradox in Redemption Gulch. They were both envied for their success and resented for their blood. They lived in a sprawling ranch house, newly built with fine lumber from the east, and, as was whispered with a mix of awe and contempt, indoor plumbing with shining nickel-plated taps. Coda, at 17, was the heir to this empire. He was a striking figure, with his father's proud bearing and his mother Winona's gentle eyes. He rode into town on a magnificent black stallion, his clothes a blend of practical buckskin and tailored Eastern fabric. He was the golden boy, blessed with wealth, looks, and a future as wide as the Montana sky. He was also the subject of Cora's silent, distant observation. The first sign was almost nothing. It was a Tuesday in late May. Coda was in the general store, waiting as his father spoke with the proprietor, Mr. Abernathy. Cora had been sent to fetch a new supply of bandages. She stood by the counter, pretending to inspect a spool of thread, but her attention was on the boy. He was leaning against a barrel of pickles, a bored expression on his face. He reached into his pocket for a piece of hard candy, and as he did, his fingers seemed to lose their resolve. The candy slipped, clattering onto the floorboards. Coda blinked, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before bending to retrieve it. Anyone else would have seen a simple, clumsy moment. Cora saw more. She saw the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand just before he dropped the candy. She saw the way he clenched his fist afterward, as if to command it back into submission. It was the same minute quiver she'd seen in old Barnaby Grizz Jones, the town prospector, whose hands shook from a lifetime of mercury use in his panning. But Coda was 17, not 70. She filed the observation away in the meticulous cabinet of her mind and said nothing. A week later, she saw him again. The Blackwood carriage, a handsome vehicle that put the mayor's buggy to shame, was parked outside the land office. Coda was sitting on the driver's seat, holding the reins, while his father concluded his business. It was a warm day, but Coda's face, usually the color of rich copper, seemed paler than usual. There was a sheen of sweat on his brow that had nothing to do with the heat. He seemed listless, his shoulders slumped. When a dog barked suddenly, he flinched with a disproportionate startle, his head snapping around, his eyes wide with a confusion that took a moment too long to clear. Again, it was nothing a casual observer would remark upon. A boy lost in thought, a boy tired from the ride into town. But Cora, whose life was a study in subtleties, saw a pattern emerging. It was like watching a finely woven tapestry and noticing two threads, almost invisible, that were the wrong color. They didn't belong. The final piece of that early puzzle fell into place at the end of June. Dr. Finch had been summoned to the Arrowhead Creek Ranch, a rare occurrence, as Chief Blackwood preferred the traditional healers of his people over the town doctor he openly distrusted. A ranch hand had suffered a nasty break in a fall from a horse. Cora accompanied the doctor, her role to carry his heavy bag and remain unseen. While Dr. Finch was inside the bunkhouse, grumbling and setting the bone, Cora waited by the buggy. The Blackwoods' ranch house was even more impressive up close. It smelled of fresh paint and new money. It was then that Coda emerged from the front door. He didn't see her. He walked to a water pump, a new, elaborate iron contraption with a long handle, and began to work it. As he leaned over, his lips parted in a slight grimace of effort. For a brief second, the light caught the inside of his mouth, and Cora saw it. It was a faint, bluish-black line along the edge of his gums, a stark, unnatural border between tooth and flesh. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen a drawing of that exact thing once, in one of the doctor's older, more obscure medical texts from London. It was a book on industrial diseases, poisons of the modern world. The caption under the grim illustration read, "The characteristic gingival line, an early harbinger of plumbism." Lead poisoning. The thought was so audacious, so impossible, that she dismissed it almost as quickly as it came. Lead? Here? In the middle of the Montana wilderness? It made no sense. He was a rich boy, living a life of pristine privilege. He wasn't a painter or a typesetter or a factory worker. When Dr. Finch emerged, sweating and self-important, he glanced over at Coda, who was now drinking deeply from the dipper. "Healthy as a young bull, that one," the doctor huffed, climbing into the buggy. "Testament to good breeding, even if it is, well, you know." Cora said nothing. She climbed into her seat, her mind racing. The tremor, the pallor, the startling. And now, the line. Dr. Finch saw a healthy young bull. Cora May Thompson, the shy girl no one ever really saw, was beginning to see a ghost. and she was terrified that she was the only one who could. The heat of July settled over Redemption Gulch like a thick, woolen blanket, suffocating the valley in shimmering waves of heat and dust. Tempers grew short, and the town's usual hum of activity slowed to a lethargic crawl. It was during this sweltering season that Coda Blackwood's shadow deepened, lengthening in ways only Cora seemed to perceive. His visits to town became less frequent, but when he did appear, the changes were more pronounced. The natural grace that had defined his movements was giving way to a certain stiffness, a careful deliberation, as if he were consciously thinking about each step. He had always been amiable, quick with a nod or a polite greeting, but now a brooding irritability clung to him. Cora witnessed it firsthand one afternoon outside the Mercantile. Coda was trying to tie his horse's reins to the hitching post, but his fingers were clumsy and uncooperative. The knot kept slipping. After the third failed attempt, he cursed under his breath and yanked the reins so hard the horse shied back, its eyes rolling. Chief Blackwood emerged from the store at that moment, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. The look that passed between them was heavy with a silent, troubled question. Cora, who had been sent to pick up a package for Dr. Finch, froze on the opposite side of the street, her own parcel clutched to her chest like a shield. Coda's outburst was minor, the kind of frustration any young man might show, but it wasn't the frustration that chilled her. It was the look of pure exhaustion on his face afterward, a weariness that went far beyond a simple, tangled knot. He looked like a man fighting a battle within his own skin. Her opportunity to see him up close and confirm her terrifying suspicion came unexpectedly. Winona Blackwood, Coda's mother, brought him directly to Dr. Finch's clinic. It was a significant gesture, a concession that the family's worry was now greater than their pride or their distrust of Western medicine. "He has spells," Winona said, her voice low and controlled, though her elegant hands were clenched tightly around her beaded purse. She was a woman of quiet dignity, her composure a stark contrast to the doctor's blustering presence. "He complains of a fire in his belly, and his head, it aches without end." Dr. Finch, clearly relishing the deference of the powerful Blackwood matriarch, puffed out his chest. "Bring him in, madam, bring him in. We'll have a look at the boy." Coda walked into the examination room with a slow, dragging gait. The vibrant energy that had once radiated from him was gone, replaced by a dull apathy. His skin had a sallow, almost greyish undertone. Cora, tasked with fetching a glass of water, had to walk past him. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was her chance. "Please, sit down, son," Dr. Finch instructed, gesturing to the examination stool. As Coda turned to sit, he met Cora's eyes for a fleeting moment. There was no recognition, only a glazed weariness. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to his mother, and Cora saw it again, clear as day in the afternoon light streaming through the window. The Burton's line. It was no longer faint. It was a distinct, dark grey demarcation on his gums, a sinister tattoo etched by a poison from within. Her hand trembled so much she almost spilled the water. "He's been working too hard, I expect," Dr. Finch declared after a cursory examination that involved listening to Coda's chest and prodding his abdomen, which made the boy wince in pain. The sun, the stress of a large ranch. Young men often think they're invincible. "It is more than that, Doctor," Winona insisted, her composure cracking slightly. "He is different. He forgets things. He gets angry for no reason." Cora stood by the door, a silent statue, her mind screaming. "It's the metal sickness. Look at his gums. Ask about the tremors." But the words were trapped behind the wall of her shyness. She was the doctor's girl, the mouse who scurried and fetched, What right did she have to speak? Who would listen? She decided to try. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. As Dr. Finch was writing out a prescription for a useless tonic of iron and bitters, Cora cleared her throat. It was a sound so small, it was almost lost in the scratching of the doctor's pen. "Doctor?" she whispered. He looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "What is it, girl?" I was just wondering, sir." Her voice was barely audible. Did you happen to look at his mouth? At his gums?" Dr. Finch's face clouded over. He looked from Cora's earnest, frightened face to the wealthy Lakota woman and her son, and his expression hardened with indignation. How dare she presume to question his methods in front of such important patients? "I am conducting this examination, Miss Thompson," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "His ailment is a simple case of nervous dyspepsia, coupled with exhaustion. Quite common. This tonic will build up his blood, and I recommend 2 weeks of complete rest. Keep him out of the sun." He tore the prescription from the pad and handed it to Winona with a dismissive flourish, a clear signal that the consultation was over. The subject of Coda's gums was buried under the doctor's massive ego. Defeated, Cora shrank back against the wall, her face burning with humiliation. Winona gave her a brief, unreadable glance before guiding her son out of the clinic. As Coda passed, he stumbled slightly, catching himself on the doorframe. The look on his face was one of profound confusion, as if he were a stranger in his own body. After they left, Dr. Finch rounded on Cora. "Let me be perfectly clear," he hissed, his face unpleasantly close to hers. "You are here to clean, to fetch, and to keep your mouth shut. You are not a doctor. You are not a nurse. You are a hired girl. Do you understand me? Your fanciful notions are not welcome here, especially not in front of clients of Mr. Blackwood's stature. You nearly embarrassed me." Cora could only nod, staring at the floor, the image of that grey line seared into her memory. The doctor's decree had been handed down. Coda was suffering from exhaustion. It was a simple, easy diagnosis that satisfied everyone except the one person who didn't matter. That evening, as Cora scrubbed the floor of the examination room, she felt a profound sense of despair. She was trapped by her own timid nature and the rigid hierarchy of her world. She possessed a truth that could save a life, but she had no voice to speak it. Coda Blackwood would go home, take his useless tonic, and continue to be poisoned, all because a proud man refused to see, and a shy girl was unable to make him. The shadow over the golden boy was growing darker, and the silence in Cora's world had never felt so loud. The 2 weeks of prescribed rest did not bring recovery. They brought a terrifying decline. Word trickled back into Redemption Gulch from the Arrowhead Creek Ranch, carried by ranch hands and suppliers, painting a grim picture. Coda Blackwood was not improving. The abdominal pains had intensified into crippling cramps that left him doubled over for hours. The headaches were now blinding, and according to one somber-faced foreman who came to town for supplies, the boy would sometimes cry out in the night from the torment. The town, as towns do, began to gossip. The whispers in the saloons and over sewing circles were a venomous mix of pity and prejudice. Caleb Thorne, the rival rancher whose jealousy of the Blackwoods was a poorly kept secret, was often at the center of these conversations. "It's the blood," Thorne would say, swirling the amber liquid in his glass at the Silver Dollar Saloon. "They live high and mighty, but you can't escape what you are. It's an Indian sickness, something their own medicine men can't even fix." Others speculated it was a curse, a spiritual payment for Chief Blackwood's audacity in accumulating so much wealth and power, for building a house with windows that looked down upon the rest of the valley. The story of Coda's illness became a cautionary tale, a dark piece of folklore reinforcing the town's ingrained biases. The crisis reached its peak during the Founders' Day celebration in early August. It was a mandatory town event, a day of speeches, games, and forced congeniality. Chief Blackwood, in a gesture of goodwill and perhaps a desperate attempt to maintain a facade of normalcy, decided his family would attend. They arrived in their fine carriage, and a hush fell over the crowd. Coda was seated between his parents. He was a ghost of his former self. His broad shoulders were slumped, and he was bundled in a blanket despite the oppressive afternoon heat. His skin had a deathly pallor, and his eyes, once sharp and intelligent, were vacant and unfocused. He seemed unaware of the stares and the murmurs that followed him. Cora was there, helping to serve lemonade at a stall run by the church ladies. She couldn't take her eyes off Coda. She felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This was no longer a subtle ailment. This was a body in open rebellion. The defining moment came during the mayor's long-winded speech. The mayor was droning on about civic pride and manifest destiny when a strangled cry cut through the air. All heads turned toward the Blackwood family. Coda had pitched forward from his chair, his body convulsing in a violent seizure. His limbs thrashed, his back arched, and a foam flecked his lips. Winona screamed, a raw, primal sound of a mother's terror. Chief Blackwood, his iron composure finally shattered, knelt beside his son, trying to restrain him, his face a mask of horror and helplessness. The crowd gasped. Women shielded their children's eyes. Men stood frozen, shocked into silence. Dr. Finch, who had been standing near the front, puffed up with self-importance, rushed forward. "Give him air! Give him space!" he commanded, pushing people back. The seizure subsided as quickly as it had begun, leaving Coda limp and unconscious on the dusty ground. The silence that followed was broken only by Winona's heartbroken sobs. Dr. Finch made a show of checking Coda's pulse and peering into his eyes. He rose to his feet, dusting off his knees, and adopted the gravest of expressions. He was no longer just a small-town doctor. He was the sole arbiter of life and death in this public theater of tragedy. "It's as I feared," he announced, his voice carrying across the unnaturally quiet square. "The boy's constitution is weak. The nervous dyspepsia has progressed. It's a wasting sickness, attacking the brain. It is consumption of the nerves." The diagnosis, though medically nonsensical, sounded terrifying and official. Consumption. It was a word that carried the weight of a death sentence. People nodded grimly. It made sense to them. The strange foreign bloodline was weak. The golden boy was wasting away from within. Caleb Thorne watched the scene with a grimly satisfied smirk. The Blackwood Empire was about to lose its heir. The mighty chief was brought low, a spectacle of suffering for the whole town to see. Cora stood behind the lemonade table, her hands gripping the wooden edge so tightly her knuckles were white. Rage, cold and pure, surged through her, a feeling so foreign it almost made her dizzy. It burned away her shyness, her fear. Consumption of the nerves. It was a lie. It was a fabrication born of arrogance and ignorance. Dr. Finch was not just wrong. He was a fool, a dangerous fool who was about to sign a boy's death warrant with his own pompous words. She watched as two men helped Chief Blackwood carry his son's limp body back to the carriage. The pride was gone from the chief's face, replaced by a raw, desperate fear that was achingly human. He was no longer a rival or a landowner. He was just a father watching his child die. In that moment, something inside Cora Mae Thompson shifted irrevocably. Her silence was no longer a shield, it was a cage, and she knew, with a certainty that resonated in her very bones, that she had to find a way to break out of it. The doctor had made his decree, and the town had accepted it. But Cora had seen the truth, and she would not let Coda Blackwood die because of a lie. The shy girl was gone, and in her place stood a woman with a desperate, terrifying purpose. The night after the Founders' Day disaster was long and suffocating. Cora lay awake in her small room above the clinic, the sounds of the town, a distant piano from the saloon, the barking of a stray dog, fading into the background of her own racing thoughts. Dr. Finch's pronouncement of consumption of the nerves echoed in her mind, a pronouncement as hollow as it was deadly. It was a diagnosis of convenience, a label for something he didn't understand, designed to preserve his authority rather than to find the truth. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet cold on the wooden floorboards. Lighting a small kerosene lamp, she went not to the clinic's main library of accepted medical texts, but to a small, dusty trunk tucked away in a storage closet. It contained the belongings of her late mother, a woman who had been more of an herbalist and a naturalist than a follower of prescribed medicine. Her mother had been a quiet woman, much like Cora, but her knowledge of the world was deep and practical. She had taught Cora to observe, to see the connections others missed. Cora lifted the heavy lid, the scent of dried lavender and old paper rising to meet her. Inside, beneath neatly folded linens, was a collection of her mother's journals. They were filled with delicate drawings of plants, notes on their properties, and observations of the natural world. But there was another, thicker ledger, one bound in worn leather. This was where her mother had recorded stories and warnings passed down from her own grandmother, who had worked in the textile mills back east. With trembling fingers, Cora flipped through the brittle pages, the lamplight casting a wavering glow. She was searching for a half-remembered story, a cautionary tale her mother had read to her once, not as a bedtime story, but as a lesson. She found it near the back. The heading was written in her mother's elegant script, "The Painter's Colic and the Metal Sickness." The entry detailed the strange and terrible illnesses that afflicted men who worked in certain trades: painters, potters who used glazes, typesetters who handled lead letters daily. Her mother had written down the symptoms described by the old mill workers: a fire in the belly that no food can quench, a pounding in the head that mimics the factory's machines, a weakness of the limbs, and a shaking of the hands that makes a man drop his tools. They grow angry and confused, their minds clouded by a fog. And the old ones knew the sign, a dark line on the gums, like a thread of black ink, a mark of the poison that has entered the blood. Cora's breath hitched. It was all there. Every single one of Coda's symptoms, described in horrifying detail. The abdominal pain, the headaches, the tremor, the irritability and confusion, and the final damning piece of evidence, the Burton's line. The book called it plumism, the sickness of lead. But the question remained: how? How could a wealthy rancher's son, living in the wide open spaces of Montana, be suffering from an industrial disease? Cora sat back on her heels, her mind a whirlwind of disconnected facts and observations. She tried to think of everything she knew about the Arrowhead Creek Ranch, everything that was different, everything that was new. The Blackwoods were wealthy, and they spent their money on modern comforts, the new house, the fresh paint. And then the memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. The plumbing. It had been the talk of the county. Chief Blackwood had spared no expense, importing materials from St. Louis. He'd boasted to the freight agent about installing the latest in modern convenience, lead-lined water pipes. They were considered the height of sophistication, far superior to the old iron or ceramic pipes that could rust or crack. They promised clean, pure water delivered right into the house. A symbol of progress and prosperity, a symbol of a slow, creeping death. The pump she had seen Coda use that day, it wasn't drawing water from a simple well, it was part of an elaborate system, a cistern that fed water through this brand new network of lead pipes directly to the kitchen and a washroom inside the house. The Blackwood family was drinking, cooking with, and bathing in water that was silently being poisoned before it ever reached their lips. It was a desperate hypothesis, a thread of logic woven from a shy girl's observation, a mother's old journal, and a rich man's pride in his modern home. The full weight of her discovery settled upon her. It was one thing to have a suspicion, it was another thing entirely to possess the answer. An answer that would require accusing the most powerful man in the valley of inadvertently poisoning his own son. An answer that would mean publicly refuting and humiliating the town doctor, her employer, a man who had already warned her to keep her fanciful notions to herself. For a moment, the sheer impossibility of it all threatened to crush her. Who was she? Cora May Thompson, the timid assistant, the girl who blended into the wallpaper. How could she possibly make them listen? A direct confrontation was out of the question. Dr. Finch would have her thrown out. Chief Blackwood, in his grief and pride, would never hear the words of a lowly town girl over the official diagnosis of a doctor. She needed proof, hard, undeniable proof, and she needed an ally, someone on the inside who was desperate enough to listen to an impossible story from the most unlikely of messengers. Her thoughts turned to Winona Blackwood. She remembered the look in the woman's eyes in the clinic, not of dismissal, but of a mother's intuition warring with a doctor's certainty. She had known, on some level, that Dr. Finch's diagnosis was wrong, and at the Founders' Day celebration, it was Winona's scream that had echoed the loudest, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Grief and fear could break a person, but they could also pry open a mind that was sealed shut. Winona was the key. Cora closed the journal, her decision made. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a new, steely resolve. The time for silent observation was over. She had to find a way to speak to Winona Blackwood. She had to make her listen. It was a terrifying gamble, with her job, her reputation, and Coda's very life hanging in the balance. The Arrowhead Creek Ranch was 5 miles out of town, a journey Cora had to make on foot. She left before dawn, a small bundle containing her mother's journal clutched in her hands, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs with every step. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, but she barely noticed the beauty of the morning. Her entire world had narrowed to the singular, terrifying goal that lay ahead. She bypassed the main entrance, knowing that a direct approach would lead to a ranch hand summarily sending her away. Instead, she circled around to the back of the property, near the vegetable garden she knew Winona tended to herself. It was a risk, approaching the grieving family's home like a trespasser, but it was the only way she could imagine getting close to Coda's mother without an intermediary. As she drew near the house, a large dog began to bark, its deep-chested warnings echoing in the still morning air. A moment later, Winona Blackwood emerged from the back door, a rifle held loosely but confidently in her hands. Her face was etched with exhaustion and sorrow, her eyes shadowed and wary. She was no longer the composed matriarch from the doctor's office. She was a sentinel guarding her broken home. "Who's there?" Winona called out, her voice strained. "Show yourself." Cora stepped out from behind a stand of cottonwood trees, her hands raised to show she was unarmed. "Mrs. Blackwood, it's me, Cora Thompson, from Dr. Finch's office." Winona's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "The doctor's girl. What are you doing here? If you have a message from that man, you can leave it at the gate." Her voice was laced with a bitterness that told Cora all she needed to know about her faith in Dr. Finch's remedies. "No, Mum. I'm not here for him. I'm here for me," Cora said, her own voice a shaky whisper. She took a tentative step forward. I need to speak with you about your son." The mention of Coda made Winona's posture stiffen. "My son is dying. The doctor has told us so. There is nothing more to be said." The finality in her tone was like a door slamming shut. This was the moment. Cora knew if she faltered now, she would lose her only chance. She took a deep breath, channeling the cold rage she'd felt at the festival. "Dr. Finch is wrong," Cora said, the words coming out stronger and clearer than she'd expected. "It's not consumption. It's not a wasting sickness of the nerves. It's a poison." Winona stared at her, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sounds were the barking dog and the rustle of leaves in the wind. "Poison?" she repeated, her voice flat. "Who would poison my son?" "No one did," Cora pressed on, her courage growing. "Not on purpose. It's the house, it's the water, it's the new pipes." She saw a flicker of something in Winona's eyes, not belief, but a sliver of intrigued confusion. Cora took another step forward, opening her mother's journal. "Please, Mrs. Blackwood, I know how this must sound. I know who I am. I'm just the doctor's assistant. But my mother, she studied these things. Old things, new things. Sicknesses that don't come from fevers or plagues. She called it the metal sickness." Cora's hands were shaking as she held out the book. "Look, it describes everything. The fire in the belly, the torment in the head, the confusion. And this," she pointed to the sketch her mother had made of a mouth, the gums clearly lined in black. "This mark, the line on the gums. I saw it on Coda. I saw it in the clinic that day, and I saw it here at the ranch, weeks before that." Winona's gaze dropped to the open page. She looked at the drawing, then back up at Cora's desperate, earnest face. The gun in her hands lowered slightly. A mother's intuition, the one that had told her the doctor's diagnosis was a lie, was now at war with the sheer absurdity of what this shy girl was claiming. "The pipes?" Winona whispered, the word laced with disbelief. "The lead pipes. Your father celebrated them. He said they were the future." "Clean water," he said. "Lead leaches into the water, Ma'am," Cora explained, her voice gaining confidence as she relayed the knowledge she'd spent all night absorbing. "Especially with soft water, like we have here. It's slow, invisible. It builds up in the body. It mimics other sicknesses. It attacks the gut, the blood, the brain. It's why he's in so much pain. It's why he had the fit." Winona flinched at the memory. She looked toward the house, toward the room where her son lay in a stupor, his body racked with pain, his mind lost in a fog. The useless tonics from Dr. Finch were lined up on his bedside table. The traditional remedies from their own healers had offered no relief. They were all treating a phantom, while the real monster flowed freely from every tap in their magnificent modern home. A single tear traced a path through the dust on Winona's cheek. It was a tear of dawning, horrifying understanding. The very thing that was meant to be a symbol of their success and safety was the instrument of their son's destruction. "My husband," Winona began, her voice cracking. "Joseph, he will not hear this. His pride is tied up in this house, in the progress it represents. He will see this as an attack. He will not believe you." "Then we can't tell him," Cora said, her own voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Not yet. We need proof. Something he can't deny." something even Dr. Finch can't dismiss. Winona looked at Cora, truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just the doctor's timid girl. There was a fire in her, a fierce intelligence, and a bravery born of quiet conviction. In the face of every obstacle, her station, her gender, her shyness, she had walked 5 miles at dawn to speak a terrifying truth to a stranger. "What do you need?" Winona asked, her voice now firm. The alliance was forged. "I need a sample of your water," Cora said, "from the kitchen tap, and I need to get it to the only person I know who can test it, an old prospector named Barnaby Jones. The town calls him Grizz. He knows metals better than anyone." Winona nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. "I will get you the water, and I will keep my husband occupied. But you must be quick, Cora Thompson. Every hour we wait, the poison does its work. Be quick." The sun was higher in the sky now, burning away the morning chill. As Winona slipped back inside the house to fetch the water sample, Cora felt a surge of hope, fragile yet fierce. She was no longer alone. In the heart of the grieving ranch, she had found an ally. The 2 women, the powerful Lakota matriarch and the invisible town girl, were now bound together in a desperate, secret race against time. The alliance between Cora and Winona operated in the shadows of the Arrowhead Creek Ranch, a secret pact fueled by desperation. Winona, with the quiet efficiency of a woman used to managing a large household, procured the water sample. She filled a clean glass bottle from the kitchen tap, while her husband, Joseph, was out on the range, his face a grim mask of grief as he tried to lose himself in the familiar rhythms of ranch work. "He is getting worse," Winona told Cora in a hushed, urgent tone as she handed over the heavy bottle, wrapped carefully in cloth. "He barely wakes now, and when he does not know me." The words were clipped, each one a shard of her breaking heart. "Go, and pray your old man is as wise as you believe." Cora's journey back was not to town, but deeper into the hills, to the ramshackle cabin where Barnaby Grizz Jones lived. Grizz was a town character, a relic from the first gold rush, with a beard that seemed to contain remnants of every meal he'd eaten for a decade, and hands permanently stained with dirt and chemicals. Most people dismissed him as a crazy old coot, but Cora knew from her mother that his eccentricity masked a brilliant, if unrefined mind when it came to geology and metallurgy. He had forgotten more about assays and ores than any fancy geologist from back east had ever learned. She found him by his creek, swirling a pan with the practiced, gentle motion of a master. He squinted at her as she approached, his blue eyes sharp and assessing under a ledge of bushy grey eyebrows. "Well, if it ain't the doc's little shadow," he grunted, not unkindly. "What brings you up to my patch? Finch run out of leeches?" Cora, breathless from her climb, held out the bottle. "Mr. Jones, I need your help. I think there's a poison in this water. A heavy metal. I think it's lead." Grizz put down his pan and took the bottle, his customary cynicism giving way to a flicker of professional interest. He held it up to the light, swirling the contents. "Lead, you say? That's a nasty customer. What makes you think so?" As concisely as she could, Cora laid out the entire story. Coda's symptoms, the timeline of his decline, the new plumbing, the Burton's line, the passage in her mother's journal. She spoke with a passion and clarity that surprised even herself. Grizz listened intently, stroking his formidable beard. He didn't mock her or question her. He recognized the methodical process of observation and deduction. It was, in its own way, a form of prospecting, sifting through a mountain of symptoms to find the one damning speck of truth. "Your mother was a smart woman, girlie," he said when she'd finished. "Smarter than that windbag, Finch, that's for sure. All right, I can test this. It'll take some time. Need to boil it down, use some reagents. It ain't a simple pan for gold. Come back tomorrow. At noon, I'll have your answer." The next 24 hours were the most agonizing of Cora's life. She returned to the clinic, slipping in unnoticed, and went about her duties in a fog of anxiety. Every task, sterilizing instruments, changing linens, sweeping floors, felt meaningless. Dr. Finch, puffed up with self-pity over the tragedy of the Blackwood boy, was insufferable. "A terrible business," he declared to anyone who would listen in the general store. "I did all I could, of course, but some constitutions are simply too fragile. It's a lesson in the limits of modern medicine when faced with inherent weakness." Cora had to bite her tongue so hard she tasted blood. The inherent weakness wasn't in Coda's blood. It was in the doctor's mind. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Coda's condition became critical. He slipped from his stupor into a deep coma, his breathing shallow and rattling. Joseph Blackwood, his hope in Western medicine shattered, had summoned the tribe's most respected shaman, a man named Stone Bear. The air in the ranch house grew thick with the smell of burning sage and the sound of low, constant chanting. A tense standoff ensued between the old ways and the new. Dr. Finch, hearing of the shaman's presence, rode out to the ranch in a fury, accusing Joseph of resorting to pagan superstition. "You'll kill the boy with your smoke and rattles," Finch bellowed on the porch, his face purple with indignation. Joseph Blackwood, his eyes hollow with grief, but his voice like flint, stood before him. "You and your tonics have done nothing but watch him die, Doctor. Your medicine is powerless here. Leave my land." The confrontation was witnessed by a half-dozen ranch hands. Word of the clash spread through town like wildfire. The doctor had been dismissed. The powerful Chief Blackwood had turned his back on the white man's world. To many, like Caleb Thorne, it was proof that the Blackwoods were, and always would be, outsiders. Cora heard the news with a surge of panic. Time was running out. Coda's body was shutting down. The fragile alliance, the secret plan. It was all balanced on a knife's edge. At noon the next day, she practically ran up the path to Grizz's cabin. He was waiting for her on his porch, his expression grim. In his hand, he held a small, greyish, metallic lump, no bigger than a thumbnail. "I boiled down gallons of that water," he said, his voice low. "Evaporated it all away, treated the residue. This is what was left in it." He dropped the lump into her palm. It was surprisingly heavy. "Lead," Cora whispered, the single word catching in her throat. "Enough in that water to kill a horse over time, let alone a boy," Grizz confirmed, his eyes hard. "You were right, girlie. The water flowing through those fancy new pipes is pure poison." Cora stared at the small piece of metal in her hand. It was an object of immense power. It was the proof. It was the truth. It was the key to saving Coda's life. But it was also a weapon that would tear the town's fragile peace apart. There was no more time for secrecy. It was time for a confrontation. Holding the small, heavy truth in her fist, she turned and headed back toward the Arrowhead Creek Ranch, her heart filled with a terrible, righteous certainty. Cora didn't stop in town. She bypassed Redemption Gulch completely, taking a game trail that cut across the hills, her worn boots kicking up dust as she ran. The piece of lead in her pocket felt like a lodestone, pulling her inexorably toward the ranch, toward the final, terrifying reckoning. She arrived at Arrowhead Creek to a scene of grim vigil. Ranch hands stood in quiet, worried groups. The shaman's chanting could still be heard, a low, mournful drone from within the house. And on the porch, pacing like a caged wolf, was Chief Joseph Blackwood. His face was a thundercloud of grief, rage, and helplessness. When he saw Cora scrambling up the path, his eyes narrowed. "You again, the doctor's girl. I told that fool Finch to stay away." Cora didn't flinch. She walked straight up the steps, her shyness burned away by the white-hot urgency of her mission. She stopped directly in front of the most powerful man in the valley, a man who could have her thrown off his land with a single word. "I am not here for Dr. Finch," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I am here for your son. And I am here with the truth." Before Joseph could respond, the front door opened. Winona stood there, her face pale, but her eyes filled with a desperate hope as she looked at Cora. Her presence gave Cora the final surge of strength she needed. "You believe my son was poisoned by a curse, or a weak bloodline, or a disease no one can name," Cora stated, looking the chief directly in the eye. "You are wrong. He was poisoned by this." She reached into her pocket and held out her hand. The small, dull lump of lead sat in her palm. Joseph Blackwood stared at it, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this? A rock?" "It is lead," Cora said, "distilled from the water in your kitchen, from the water that flows through your new, modern pipes. Your son is dying of lead poisoning. The metal sickness. It has a name. It is called plumism." She recited the symptoms with chilling accuracy, the things she had seen, the things Winona had told her. The tremor in his hand he tried to hide, the pallor of his skin, the fire in his belly and the storm in his head, the grey line on his gums, the seizure. It is all there, in every medical book on the subject, if Dr. Finch had ever bothered to look in the right one. At that moment, Dr. Finch himself arrived, having ridden out to make one last arrogant attempt to reassert his authority. He stormed up the porch, his face florid. "What is the meaning of this? Blackwood, I forbid you to listen to the hysterical ramblings of a servant girl." Cora turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You called it consumption of the nerves. You prescribed an iron tonic for a boy whose blood was being poisoned by lead. You are a fraud, Doctor. Your pride is killing him." The accusation, so bold and public, hung in the air, stunning both Finch and Blackwood into silence. Winona stepped forward, her voice resonating with a mother's authority. "Joseph, listen to her. She saw what we refused to see. She came to me in secret because she knew you would not believe her. We tested the water. This girl, she is the only one who has made any sense." Joseph looked from his wife's pleading face to Cora's defiant one, and then down at the damning piece of metal. His mind raced, connecting the dots, the onset of Coda's illness coinciding with the completion of the house, the modern pipes he had been so proud of, a symbol of his triumph, now revealed as a potential source of his greatest tragedy. His pride, a fortress he had built around himself for years, began to crumble. He took the piece of lead from Cora's hand, feeling its unnatural weight. The truth of it settled into his soul, cold and heavy. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, directed not at the stunned doctor, but at Cora. "First we stop the poison," Cora said, taking charge. "No more water from the pipes. We use the old well, and we boil everything. We need to help his body get rid of the poison that's already there. We need foods that can help. My mother wrote about it. She spoke of milk, of foods rich in calcium that could help push the lid from his bones, of dark greens, of specific herbal infusions to soothe the gut and support the kidneys. It was a combination of folk wisdom and practical science." Dr. Finch scoffed, a desperate attempt to regain control. "Nonsense! Poultices and potions. The boy is comatose. He needs proper medical—" "He needs a doctor who listens," Joseph Blackwood interrupted, his voice like ice. He turned his full, formidable glare on Finch. "You are no longer welcome in this house or on this land. Get out." Humiliated and exposed, Dr. Finch sputtered for a moment, then turned on his heel and retreated, his reputation in tatters. What followed was a new kind of battle. Under Cora's quiet direction, and with Winona as her loyal commander, they began the slow, arduous process of nursing Coda back. The shaman, Stone Bear, recognizing a different kind of truth, didn't leave. He worked alongside them, his spiritual support and knowledge of cleansing herbs complementing Cora's practical remedies. The days were long and filled with small, agonizingly slow victories. The first was when Coda's breathing deepened. A week later, he opened his eyes, though they were unfocused. 2 weeks after the confrontation, he spoke his mother's name in a weak, raspy voice. The news of Dr. Finch's dismissal and the real cause of Coda's illness swept through Redemption Gulch, overturning the established order. Cora May Thompson was no longer the invisible girl. She was now the subject of awe and whispered speculation. Some called her a healer, others a witch, but no one ignored her anymore. Months later, as autumn painted the valley in hues of gold and crimson, Coda Blackwood was sitting on the porch, thin and still weak, but with the light of awareness back in his eyes. Cora, now a regular and honored visitor at the ranch, sat with him. "I remember," Coda said, his voice still soft. "Bits and pieces. It was like being trapped in a dark, noisy room. But I remember your face. In the clinic. You were looking at me, like you were trying to solve a puzzle." Cora felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a remnant of her old self. "I just saw what was there," she said simply. Joseph Blackwood emerged from the house and stood beside them, looking at his recovering son. He then turned his gaze to Cora, his expression one of profound, humbling gratitude. "You saved him, Cora Thompson," he said. "You saw the truth that my pride and another man's ignorance tried to bury. This family and this ranch are forever in your debt." Cora was no longer the shy girl who scurried along the walls. She was the woman who had spoken truth to power, who had trusted her own quiet observations over the loud certainties of the world. In saving the rich Lakota boy's life, she had also, irrevocably, found her own voice. And in the quiet understanding that passed between her, Coda, and his father, a new foundation was laid in Redemption Gulch. One built not on prejudice and pride, but on the undeniable power of a truth quietly seen. The story of Cora May Thompson and Coda Blackwood is more than just a tale from the Wild West. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest courage isn't always found in a gunfight or a daring raid. Sometimes, the greatest courage is found in a quiet voice that refuses to be silenced, in a keen eye that chooses to see what everyone else ignores. It teaches us that truth doesn't care about your station in life, your wealth, or your gender. It simply waits for someone brave enough to recognize it. Cora's story shows that one person's quiet observation, backed by conviction, can unravel a web of ignorance and prejudice, saving lives and changing the destiny of an entire community. It reminds us to listen to the quiet voices, both around us and within us, for they often speak the most important truths. If this story of unlikely heroism and quiet courage resonated with you, please help our channel grow. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with someone who loves a story that goes beyond the surface, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of hidden history and unsung heroes. Your support allows us to continue bringing these incredible stories to light. Thank you for listening.